Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Alejandro Vivas from the public. I am a public participation specialist from the Office of Environmental Equity. This morning, we are going to host our Hazardous Waste Management Performance report workshop. My apologies. And I'd like to start by informing you of our language and caption options and a few housekeeping items. This workshop will be broadcast in English and Spanish, and each participant must select their preferred language to hear the meeting. Audio interpretation is available through Zoom. Please click the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen or the Zoom app to select your language. Automated closed captions have been turned on for this meeting, and you can turn them off by clicking the CC icon or move the captions box. Next slide, please. We have a couple housekeeping items. First, please use Chrome, Safari, or Firefox for this presentation. It would make things go a lot smoother. And if you'd like to submit questions, we have the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen that you can use to submit questions. And please also understand that our camera and microphone features have been disabled for attendees. However, this entire session is being recorded. Now, all of our previous workshops have been recorded, so if you'd like to review any information you may have missed, please refer to them on our website, which we'll link here in a second, and you can see all of our previous workshops. Now, please, at the end of this session, we will be providing an evaluation, so if you wouldn't mind filling that out, it would make things easier on figuring out how we're doing and how we can do better in the future. Next slide, please. Now, for further information, you're welcome to click on the QR code that you see in front of you on the slide. We also have our DTSC Hazardous Waste Management Plan website that you'll see up on the screen, and you can email us at dtsc_HWPlan@dtsc.ca.gov. And of course, you can also join our list, our e-list for updates, and that way you can continually receive any updates through your email as soon as we provide them. Now, I'd like to hand things over to Ryan Dominguez. He's our supervising hazardous substance engineer for the Hazardous Waste Management Program, and he'll go ahead and go over our schedule and kick things off for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandro. And hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Ryan Dominguez. I'm the supervisor for the Hazardous Waste Management Plan unit. First, thanks for joining us today. We are very excited to be here and begin talking about deeper subjects for the Hazardous Waste Management Plan. This series was developed to provide ongoing public education and encourage continued collaborative interactions and discussions during development of the Hazardous Waste Management Plan. Now, this workshop series will discuss focused topics that are based on feedback that we've received over the last 2 years, and will provide additional information that's related to the Hazardous Waste Management Plan development. We have up on the screen that the tentative workshop schedule. These dates and topics are subject to change. You'll see some of these dates include ranges. These aren't 3-day workshops. We're in the process of finalizing the dates and anticipate workshop dates to be within these timeframes. I do have one update that popped up this morning. The next workshop we have up here is August 14th. We're going to move that back a week to the 21st, and we will send out an invitation for that, but wanted to point that out here. So please join our e-list to receive updates, and we have a few of these up on our website currently. Each workshop will be recorded, so as Alejandro was saying, if you miss any workshops or want to view the presentations again, please visit our Hazardous Waste Management Plan workshop and our website. The first topic we're going to cover is about data sources and how some of the data sources may be used, where the information in the report that was published in November 2023, where that data comes from. Now, there's going to be a lot of information in this workshop session. And again, you'll be able to view it again on the website to catch up on pieces you may have missed. But we wanted to talk and provide a lot of information about our data sources and potentials to connect these different data sources and talk about which ones may provide better opportunities than others to use. Next slide, please. All right, so we'll do a quick poll. We've been doing a few polls or surveys prior to the workshop and after to try and get a sense of how we're doing and who's attending in terms of if folks have reviewed or have seen some of our workshops in the past. It helps us understand where we can start with information. So thank you. So first, there's 3 questions here. 1, are you familiar with any of the state's hazardous waste tracking systems? 2, have you read our 2023 hazardous waste management report? And 3, have you attended any of our previous workshops? I'll let that sit for a little bit. 68%. Okay, we're about 68% participation so far. And we'll give it another few seconds here. 80. All right, that's probably, yeah. All right, let's show those results.
Share the results.
Okay, so 1 and 2, we have about, oh, good. So a lot of folks are familiar with the different tracking systems. So about 76%. It's about half, a little less than half have read the report.
Más de la mitad han leído el reporte y es sobre el 50%, 50 y 50 de los que están atendiendo. Gracias por llenar esta encuesta, es de mucha ayuda. Y vamos
haven't attended our various workshops. So just as some background, in 2021, Senate Bill 158 was approved, and it made changes to part of our health and safety code in 25-135. Now, these changes require the department to complete hazardous waste management reports that feed information into hazardous waste management plans. So in 2023, DTSC published the first hazardous waste management report. Now, we're using information from that report to draft the first hazardous waste management plan, which is due by March of 2025. Now, the draft plan, or the plan, will be presented to the Board of Environmental Safety for approval. And then the cycle starts again. So this is an iterative process. These reports feed information into a plan, and then we do another report and do another plan. And it's an ongoing process over time. So like I said, we're currently using the information in the report and feedback that we've received over the last couple of years to develop the hazardous waste management plan, this first one. Now, this plan will include goals and recommendations. So we're currently working to develop those. Next slide, please. As a reminder, you can access our 2023 report on our webpage. You can use the QR code here, or you can go to our website and it's in the yellow-orange box. You can click that button and the report, it'll bring you to the report. And we do recommend reading the full report and reviewing the appendices. Data from the report and your comments is being used to help develop the plan. And so it's really provides a good basis and background for the information that we're going to talk about today. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that this workshop is going to talk about data, and how we may be able to use it. And as you will see, there are many data sources that inform the November 2023 report and that we use to understand hazardous waste data. We've also received comments and feedback about certain databases like the Toxic Release Inventory, the California Environmental Reporting System, and various tracking reports for universal waste. Now, since we published the report, our unit has been able to dig further into some of these data sources to determine how the information may be used to improve data harmonization. How do we connect these data sources together? How do we interpret the information in them? Now, based on our current research, we believe some goals and recommendations in the plan could be focused on determining how to measure source reduction to better understand how much hazardous waste is not being generated because of source reduction activities. We will get into what source reduction is during today's presentation. Another subject could be streamlining access to data from the California Environmental Reporting System to better understand on-site hazardous waste treatment and recycling. Also cleaning up manifest data in the hazardous waste tracking system. And utilizing hazardous waste forecasting to improve the understanding of hazardous waste management demand and capacity needs in the future. So with that, I will turn it over to the team. The presentation runs about an hour and 15 minutes, and we'll have a discussion at the end.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate that. And thank you, Alejandro, for setting up the meeting today. So to get started, thank you all for attending. This is going to be a very detailed discussion for opportunities to harmonize data in hazardous waste management, and then how we'd be able to use this in the future. My name is Shawn Browning. I'm the senior engineer with the team. We also have Karen Peng, who's an environmental scientist, and Spencer Eberhard, also environmental scientist. So let's get going. Next slide, please. Maybe next slide. Wait. Okay. So yeah, high level, we talk about for today's purpose. We are going to talk about those data systems, and we'll have an opportunity at the end to be able to discuss and get your guys' comments and any feedback. Next slide. Here we get a little more granular for today. We have a little agenda for us. First, we'll be talking about data harmonization in the lens of the waste management hierarchy. Then we'll go into source reduction and quantification that we've been analyzing. Then into on-site recycling and treatment, off-site recycling, treatment and disposal, and then those forecasting capabilities that we've been discussing. Next slide. So the plan will include 4 key focus areas. First, in understanding and improving ways for environmental justice. Then also updating waste criteria, waste classification criteria, strategies on the waste reduction, and then capacity planning. Within our capacity planning, we believe there are many ways to improve the data reporting, to improve our future hazardous waste management reports, and then the information that feeds into our plan. Next slide. To do this, let's first look at hazardous management. California's approach to hazardous waste management incorporates a concept of a preferred hierarchy. This basic structure has hierarchy has source reduction as our highest priority, followed by hazardous waste recycling, treatment, and then finally land disposal. To increase the most preferred areas of the waste management hierarchy, the hazardous waste management system will need to have excess capacity and resources in the most preferred areas, like source reduction or recycling. Otherwise, hazardous waste will need to be treated or be disposed of in a landfill. Next slide. Tracking all of this data for hazardous waste management is not in one single location within our own agency or even currently available to the team. So we believe there's room for continued improvement and harmonization of that data. So what is data harmonization? The simplest definition we were able to produce was to bring information or data from multiple different sources to one location. We are not the only ones who believe we can improve in this data management, and since we have heard this from you as well. Next slide. We've been receiving comments in our previous workshops, and here's one that were provided. California must work across its agencies to improve data collection and tracking practices in hazardous waste management. Next slide, please. We've heard comments around the toxics release inventory, in which it might be a valuable resource for our data and understanding of hazardous waste generation, as well as DTSC should develop better methods for tracking source reduction in the future to be able to understand their trends and successes. Next slide, please. We've also heard it from our Board of Environmental Safety, in which they provided a number of different comments. One here was around investing in data fidelity and investigating how to harmonize these data sources. Next slide, please. So to kick off, we'll talk a little bit on the hazardous waste management hierarchy. Go ahead, next, click through, and then go ahead, next slide. So as we go through today's workshop, we'll be coming back to this diagram a few times and review on data sources and opportunities to understand how to harmonize these data sources. So next slide. So if you've attended some of our previous workshops, this diagram is probably pretty familiar to you. We're showing how the flow of hazardous waste goes from generators on the left-hand side to management facilities on the right-hand side. These can be businesses or the general public can generate hazardous waste in their day-to-day activities. This can be soil from a construction site, solvent from chemical reactions or solvent cleanings, to even your computer screen that you're currently using, or pressure-treated wood from your home fence. If a generator can't reduce the amount of hazardous waste that's being generated with source reduction activities, the material become a waste and could become a hazardous waste. Go ahead and click, yeah. One addition that we wanted to be able to add today was around on-site management by generators. Generators can also treat or recycle their hazardous waste to decrease the amount of hazardous waste that needs to be managed off-site. If hazardous waste needs to be managed off-site, it will likely need to be manifested, transported, and go to a recycling, treatment, or a disposal facility. Next slide. If we split recycling and treatment to show on-site management, we get a diagram that looks a little bit more like this. So next slide. Now we can see some adjustments to the diagram where we have source reduction still on top in our highest priority. And we've split the less preferred management methods into on-site on the left and off-site on the right. Each of these areas have different tracking systems for hazardous waste data, and most of these tracking systems are not managed by DTSC, and we can discuss that a little bit more. Go ahead, next slide. Here we've captured those main components from the last slide, with source reduction on the left, on-site management in the middle, and off-site to the right. Just below that, we have the names of the tracking systems that we've identified thus far that contain some of the data that we're looking to acquire. First, with source reduction, we see data systems like the toxics release inventory, which is managed by US EPA. We have biannual reports, also by US EPA, and SB 14 reports that are produced by generators, which end up encompassing 3 different types of documents. For on-site management, the primary tracking system is the California Environmental Reporting System, also known as CERS, which is also managed by Cal EPA. And for off-site management, we've split this into manifested and unmanifested data. First, for manifested is the Hazardous Waste Tracking System, which is managed by DTSC. And then for unmanifested hazardous waste, we have the Universal Waste Electronic Devices Report, which also known as UWED. For unmanifested waste, we also see different surveys, collection data websites, and annual reports. As you can see, many of these databases are not actually managed by DTSC, and many of these we do actually have current access to. And to get better understanding of hazardous waste management data within California, we see this harmonization as an important opportunity for us to improve the understanding of hazardous waste generation and management within California. Next slide. With that, we'll turn it over to Karen, who's going to be able to talk a little bit about our source reduction analysis and some of those reports. Next slide.
Alrighty, hello, I'm Karen Peng, environmental scientist, and I'll be going over the source reduction section for this presentation. All right, so as the first level in the waste management hierarchy, source reduction is the most preferred and prioritized. Source reduction, in essence, refers to the action that prevents the generation of hazardous waste or the action that causes a lessening of the properties that make the waste hazardous. And the quantification of hazardous waste source reduction is one avenue to better understand capacity in California. Next slide, please. To make the distinction, source reduction can include things like operational improvements, production process changes, and product reformulations, essentially practices that facilities can implement to lead to a less generation of hazardous waste. Now, what source reduction is not are actions taken after hazardous waste has already been generated, actions that just concentrate the constituents in order to reduce the volume of it, actions that dilute the hazardous waste, actions that just move hazardous waste from one medium to another, such as from soil to water. And then lastly, source reduction is not the treatment of hazardous waste, as once again, this doesn't reduce generation at the source. Next slide, please. So again, the three databases and resources that we'll be going over today that have been identified as potential tools for source reduction quantification are, number one, the Toxic Releases Inventory, also known as TRI, number two, biannual reports, and then number three, SB 14 reports. Next slide, please. So we'll first be going into TRI. Next slide. So what is TRI? So TRI stands for the Toxic Releases Inventory, and it's the US EPA's federally mandated tracking system. And this tracking system database was mandated by Section 313 of the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act of 1986, and it's also known as EPRA. So eligible facilities report toxic chemical releases and disposal information, as well as their pollution prevention activities into TRI on an annual basis. And many of these facilities that report to TRI are manufacturers, but certain waste management facilities and utilities can also report. And in the context of TRI, the releases of chemicals include ones that are emitted to the air, discharged to water, or disposed of in some sort of land disposal unit. Next slide, please. So with all of that in mind, I wanted to go over the purpose of the Hazardous Waste Management Plan Unit for evaluating and better understanding the functions of TRI. So based on public and interested party comments over the years, TRI was suggested as a possible tool for quantifying source reduction of hazardous waste. And one of the goals of the Hazardous Waste Management Plan Unit is also to determine if data from various databases can be synthesized, particularly with the Hazardous Waste Tracking System, or HWPlan. And as mentioned previously, this is the database that houses hazardous waste generation data and manifests from cradle to grave. Next slide, please. So in order to better understand how TRI operates, and what it's required for, it's also important to understand who needs to report to TRI. So eligibility includes the reported chemical being part of the Section 313 chemical list, and that the chemical was either manufactured, processed, or otherwise used. The facility must also be part of the Section 313 NAAQS codes list. And just for some additional context, NAAQS codes come from the North American Industry Classification System, and its 2 to 6 digit codes are used by different federal statistical agencies to better categorize businesses based on their most prevalent business activity. And TRI's reporting eligibility also requires that the facility have 10 or more full-time employees. And then lastly, the facility must use more than the allowed amount of chemicals in one calendar year. Next slide, please. Now, in order to determine if TRI aligned with HWTS for source reduction quantification, it was important to consider various definitions. In particular, we were looking for a column of data within TRI that would align best with hazardous waste definitions in order to compute our queries. Now, waste is defined as any solid, liquid, semi-solid, or contained gaseous discarded material that is relinquished, recycled, or inherently waste-like. And it's also important to note that as waste only encompasses contained gases, uncontained gases such as air emissions are not considered waste. Next slide, please. Furthermore, hazardous waste, in essence, are waste with properties that make it potentially dangerous or harmful to human health or the environment. And hazardous wastes are either listed or exhibit one of the four characteristics: ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, and toxicity. There are, however, many nuances and exclusions within the regulatory definitions of hazardous waste. And what I'm describing here is just a very high-level summary of what hazardous waste is. So more detailed explanations can be found in our
contaminante y también tenemos unos
previous
niveles
workshops,
muy altos
as well as
de
the
lo que es
2023
ese
Hazardous Waste Management
desperdicio
Report.
contaminante. Así que vamos a encontrar que en los talleres
So
anteriormente,
after
también
our
al
initial
2023,
assessment, we determined
tuvimos un
that
reporte
TRI's
del
production waste
manejo
column most
de estos
resembled hazardous waste.
desperdicios y la parte
However, there were
inicial,
some
como se ha
caveats that we
determinado,
needed to be aware of during our
la
queries.
producción.
So TRI's
Estamos,
production waste is the
necesitamos
sum of on and off-site releases, and releases would include things like air emissions, discharges to bodies of water, disposal activities such as underground well injections, as well as placement into landfills. And it's important to again note that air emissions and uncontained gases are notably not considered a waste. So DTSC doesn't have the authority to regulate things like that, like hazardous waste. Therefore, while many of TRI's toxic chemical releases can be considered waste by DTSC, not all types of toxic chemical releases are waste. All right, so TRI's production waste also include on and off-site energy recovery, recycling, and then treatment. On the other hand, hazardous waste includes two main types, again, that being characteristic and listed. And some examples of listed waste would be the F-list waste, also known as hazardous waste from non-specific sources. And these largely come from manufacturer and industrial operations. So hazardous waste with waste codes like F006 or F032 are examples of listed waste. And just for some additional context, more specifically, F006 refers to wastewater treatment sludges from electroplating operations, of course, with some exclusions. So with the understanding that TRI's production waste includes chemicals that DTSC doesn't consider hazardous waste or even waste at all, and with the fact that certain TRI's toxic releases can be considered waste, but not fully, we again still use the production waste column for our subsequent queries for our first evaluation of TRI. Next slide, please. In addition to comparing TRI's production waste and hazardous waste, it's also important to make the conceptual distinction between the way TRI defines chemicals and how hazardous waste is defined. In the case of TRI, the quantities of the reported toxic chemical is actually the pure concentration amount of the chemical that is found in a mixture or product that the facility uses. Along the same vein, the percentage of source reduction for production waste that is being reported into TRI, that is the percentage of source reduction for the release of that specific toxic chemical, rather than the reduction of the entire waste stream or products. On the flip side, in the various databases that DTSC uses, and in the way that waste classification operates, the volume of a waste code encompasses the entire waste stream. And especially in the case of toxicity testing for characteristic hazardous waste, waste codes are assigned based on the constituents or chemicals that fail the testing and therefore categorize that entire waste stream as hazardous. So because of this difference in reporting and conceptual definition, the numbers in TRI and HWTS are proportionally very different, with HWTS resultingly showing much greater numbers. Next slide, please. And then just one more click. So to summarize, I'll be going over the challenges that we identified after we completed our evaluation and queries with TRI, as well as its synthesis with HWTS. So a common link in data is required to be able to analyze and compute queries of data from two different databases. And since the only thing common between TRI and HWTS that are reported are NAAQS codes and not other more common types of unique identifier for facilities, we had to use NAAQS codes as a common similarity to link and harmonize these two data sets. So our first challenge comes from the fact that NAAQS codes do not completely capture the unique entries made by facilities, and rather it only characterizes the general category of business activities of the reporting facility. So this unfortunately does make comparisons between two different data sets more vague. Next slide, please. So the second challenge that we identified are the reporting eligibility requirements that TRI and HWTS have. Unlike TRI, HWTS doesn't have restrictions on certain facilities' NAAQS codes that can report. And when comparing the NAAQS codes that reported in HWTS to the ones in TRI's NAAQS list, TRI actually excluded a considerable number of 6-digit NAAQS codes. We also identified TRI's reporting threshold eligibility requirements to be problematic. So generally, TRI's threshold limits 4 chemicals. That is how much chemicals need to be released to be required to report. We found that that ranges from 10 pounds to 25,000 pounds. And while according to DTSC's definitions, large quantity generators are not excluded from TRI's reporting requirements, certain hazardous waste, particularly from small quantity generators, hold the potential to be missed in TRI because the facility didn't generate enough to exceed TRI's threshold limits. Next slide, please. The third challenge that we identified is that definitions in TRI don't align with hazardous waste definitions. And while we did use the production waste column in TRI for our initial basic queries, we were aware that TRI's production waste contains certain categories that we don't identify as true hazardous waste generation or as hazardous waste at all. Next slide, please. And then lastly, the fourth challenge that we identified is that for the source reduction data available on TRI, estimated annual reduction for facilities are unfortunately only reported in percentage ranges. Now, what we did have initial plans to calculate source reduction quantities by using the annual reduction percentage range on the reported TRI production waste column. However, this is currently difficult to achieve since, as previously described, the definition of production waste in TRI is not completely identical to hazardous waste. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, after our first pass of evaluations of the TRI database, we have determined that it's currently not compatible enough with the definition of hazardous waste to be used in source reduction quantification. While there are some similarities, attempts to filter out certain categories and columns for quantification purposes to achieve total conceptual equivalence in definition also definitely risks convoluting data. And the differences in reporting eligibilities between TRI and HWTS may also lead to a large data gap with areas of source reduction data missing when we're extracting numbers from TRI. Ultimately, while DTSC has determined this, further evaluation will still be needed in the future to determine the other ways that TRI can be used for hazardous waste management in California. All right, so this concludes this section on using TRI for source reduction quantification, and we'll now be moving on to biennial reports. Next slide, please. And then next slide. So another potential avenue for quantifying source reduction in California is from biennial reports. The US EPA and DTSC both require certain RCRA hazardous waste generators and facilities to report their hazardous waste generation activities conducted during odd numbered years. So submitted to RCRA info, things like generated waste streams by waste codes, generation quantities, offsite shipment quantities, and management methods are all examples of data that are submitted to biannual reports. That being said, eligibility requirements for the reports include being a RCRA large quantity generator, or if the reporting facility treated, stored, or disposed of RCRA hazardous waste on site that are subject to RCRA permitting requirements. Next slide, please. Another data piece that is submitted in the biannual reports is information about waste minimization. Compared to source reduction, waste minimization is a much more umbrella term that encompasses source reduction, but also includes on and off-site waste management methods that reduce waste before disposal. So generators report waste minimization codes, and these facilities have the option to report codes that indicate waste minimization was, number one, implemented prior to the reporting year and during, number two, initiated during the reporting year, or number three, was determined not feasible or not attempted at all. And these codes are reported to assist the US EPA and DTSC to better understand the efforts that facilities are initiating to decrease the amount of hazardous waste being generated. There's also an optional comments section in the reports for facility to include additional information, such as the quantity of reduction and explanations of feasibility. But again, since this is an optional comments, not every facility would report information like that. Next slide, please. All being said, biannual reports may also hold potential in assisting in hazardous waste capacity quantification. However, some gaps in data are anticipated as only large quantity generators of RCRA waste are required to report. Additionally, for certain years, non-RCRA hazardous waste data is not readily available. But ultimately, the full facets of the usability of biannual reports for DTSC to both quantify source reduction and syncing databases would be determined through further evaluations by staff. And if not for source reduction quantification, further assessment would also be needed to determine if biannual reports may be useful to quantify other aspects of hazardous waste capacity, again, such as off-site shipment quantities and other waste management methods. All right, so this concludes the portion of biannual reports, and I'll now be moving on to SB 14 reports. Alrighty, so what are SB 14 reports? So the Hazardous Waste Source Reduction and Management Review Act is commonly known as the California Senate Bill 14, also known as just SB 14. Under this act, eligible generators of hazardous waste prepare SB 14 reports every 4 years. And eligibility for generators include submitting reports when more than 12,000 kilograms of hazardous waste per year or 12 kilograms of extremely hazardous waste per year is generated. And generators have been required to prepare these reports since 1991. And then just to preface before we begin, the information on the reporting format and requirements of SB 14 that I'll be describing today in this section are based on a portion of the current regulatory requirement. And therefore, I will also not be covering the reporting requirements for small businesses. All right, so SB 14 reports generally consist of 3 different types of documents. Number one, the source reduction evaluation review and plan, also known as just a plan. And this is a prospective document that details the facility's operation, waste generation data by waste stream, as well as discussion on different source reduction measures and their feasibility. Number two, the summary progress report, also known as the SPR, and this discusses a facility's progress in implementing said source reduction measures. And then lastly, number 3, the hazardous waste management performance report, also known as just a report. And this is a retrospective document that discusses waste stream management for the reporting year. Next slide, please. To provide some context, I would like to quickly discuss some of the historical pollution prevention or P2 programs in TTSC that worked with SB 14 reports. The Alternative Technology Division, or ATD, which was renamed several times prior, it began operating under this specific name in 1989. Then in 1992, ATD was disbanded and the Pollution Prevention Public and Regulatory Assistance Program, or PPP-RAP, was created from parts of ATD. However, a year later, in 1993, PPP-RAP was dissolved and the Office of Pollution Prevention and Technology Development, or OPPTD, was created, and it operated until around 2012. Next slide, please. So it is important to note that within these programs that I just described, units and subcommittees worked with universities and different organizations to support research on pollution prevention technology and different industry techniques in California. More specifically, throughout the years and different unit configurations, these units, alongside supporting research, created industry-specific technical documents such as guidance manuals and videos as a way to assist businesses, particularly for small quantity generators, to help assist in overcoming barriers to implement source reduction measures and techniques. In 1991, DTSC began to select industry categories for review for the development of industry assessment reports, and SB 14 plans and reports were reviewed for their proper preparation and completion. And this process often included interacting with facility personnel and even facility visits by DTSC staff. And this was a great way for staff to provide direct technical and regulatory assistance to generators. The data that was gathered through the review of SB 14 reports allowed DTSC to conduct industry and cross-industry assessments, and ultimately to share this knowledge through publications, workshops, and conferences. And again, through this ultimately created a much more direct line of communication between DTSC and generators. Next slide, please. In July of 2012, SB 1018 was enacted, and it amended the SB 14 reports and reporting requirements for generators. So SB 1018 deleted the requirement for DTSC to select generators every 2 years to assess their SB 14 plan and report. As a result, generators were no longer required to submit any types of SB 14 reports to DTSC, even the SBRs that were previously submitted to DTSC by every generator. Generators are still required to prepare reports to this day. However, they only need to keep the reports on site. And then generators will then submit their reports to DTSC or the Certified Unified Program Agencies, also known as CUPAs, only if either entities were to ever specifically request for them. However, in general, generators are no longer required to submit to DTSC. So once OPPTD disbanded at around 2012, the Safer Consumer Products, or SCP unit, soon formed in 2013. And the new SCP unit had reconfigured initiatives and shifted focus to reducing hazardous chemicals in consumer products and evaluating safer alternatives by implementing the SCP regulations. It is important to note that with the statutory amendments by SB 1018, DTSC shifted their focus from providing guidance to facilities on how to reduce hazardous waste generation to regulating and reducing hazardous chemicals in consumer products. All being said, currently SB 14 reports are generally requested by CUPAs as part of their hazardous waste generator inspection process. However, there is typically not a technical evaluation on the source reduction data reported on these reports. Next slide, please. One more aspect of SB 14 that I wanted to briefly discuss was some of the on and off-site quantification potential that SB 14 reports have. So since the Hazardous Waste Management Performance Report, again, also known as just a report, since it serves as a retrospective document for generators, it discusses on and off-site waste stream management methods, quantities, and the factors affecting these methods for the reporting year. And just one consideration highlight is that since SB 14 reports are submitted every 4 years, the quantification won't be provided on an annual basis. But all being said, just like how further evaluation will be needed for the source deduction quantification capabilities of SB 14 reports as a whole. Further assessment would better determine the capabilities of the on- or offsite quantification potential for the report. Next slide, please. So to reiterate, plans, SPRs, and reports from SB 14 reports, they combined quantify the generation of major hazardous waste streams, project generation in the next reporting year, evaluate source deduction feasibility, and assess waste management. And since SB 1018 and the change of reporting requirements, there have unfortunately been a loss of a main entity to provide guidance and technical assessment on the source reduction efforts made by these businesses and generators. So with the identified data gaps in mind, DTSC is working to determine ways to alleviate these disconnects by using SB 14 reports. And again, SB 14 reports, which better align with hazardous waste definitions and our waste classification system, they serve as a much more promising avenue to assist in hazardous waste capacity quantification, specifically for source reduction. Next slide, please. Now, to summarize the 3 different resources that DTSC has or have evaluated, DTSC again has determined that SB 14 reports are currently the most promising resource to assist with source reduction quantification, as well as data harmonization with other databases. Data gaps from different definitions and reporting eligibility differences, problems that we're seeing in TRI and biannual reports, these problems and challenges are kept to a minimum in the case of SB 14 reports, especially when we're considering harmonizing it with different databases in the future. However, again, DTSC is currently lacking resources and staffing to technically assess reports and properly provide source deduction guidance for generators. Because of this, DTSC is considering the creation of a public database that houses data from SB 14 reports, which would also serve as a hub to centralize these reports, since they're not currently being submitted to DTSC or readily available to the public. And this data would also hopefully serve as a quantification tool in the future. Ultimately, though, DTSC is in the planning phase of this process and will definitely need to further develop this database concept. So this concludes the section on source deduction quantification, and I'll now be passing it back to Shawn.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. Now we'll be able to, since we've just talked about source reduction, we'll move on to on-site treatment and recycling. Next slide. I think go ahead and continue to the next slide after. When we talk about treatment of hazardous waste, it's good to make sure everyone understands the definition of treatment. For when it comes to hazardous waste, it's Health and Safety Code 25123.5, which says any method, technique, or process which is designed to change the physical, chemical, or biological character or composition of the hazardous waste, or removes or reduces its harmful properties or characteristics. When you review this definition, it doesn't talk about where the hazardous waste is going prior to treatment or after treatment. So when you look at this definition, it also includes hazardous waste recycling. When it comes to managing hazardous waste, recycling is a form of treatment under statutory definitions. So let's take a look at some of these potential hazardous waste treatments. These treatments can include solvent distillation, which looks more akin to hazardous waste recycling, filtration of hazardous waste, pH adjustments to neutralize more acidic or caustic wastes, incineration of flammable wastes, or even physical alterations like breaking down universal wastes. Next slide. We spoke earlier, recycling and treatment of hazardous waste can be done either on-site by generators or off-site by management facilities. On-site management by California generators generally requires a permit for when it comes to treatment of their hazardous waste unless it's excluded or exempted from these requirements. These permits are issued by the local CUPAs and require reports to understand the amounts of hazardous waste being managed by each generator and are submitted to Cal EPA's SERS, which is California's environmental reporting system. For offsite treatment and recycling of manifested hazardous waste, it can be done by the commercial management facilities and when they're in California are required a permit from DTSC. Most hazardous waste when generated will be tracked on universal manifests, and the data will be tracked on the hazardous waste tracking system. If a hazardous waste like universal waste is exempt from these tracking requirements, they may be tracked on separate reporting systems or surveys, but not fully, or not always. Next slide. So to go into more detail on the reporting systems for on-site management, we'll go ahead and continue on. For on-site management, when generators does on-site management, hazardous waste on-site, unless exempted, they will need to report the maximum amount of treatment they are permitted to do each year inside of SIRS. This maximum amount is more akin to each generator's hazardous waste management capacity versus the tracking we see for hazardous waste generation and on-site management on manifested hazardous waste. Our team has reviewed a number of these reports in SIRS, but since our team does not have access to the aggregated data tables, our team had to go business by business, report by report, which unsurprisingly is very time consuming. We did 1 year's review and we're still not done with a couple of counties. Consequently, a review of on-site management by generators is not included in our first 2023 hazardous waste management report. And we're working to close this data gap. And we see this as a good opportunity in our planning efforts. Next slide. Just to come back to this diagram that we saw earlier, we can see where certain hazardous wastes are being tracked. Go ahead and click forward. So for on-site management, that is within Cal EPA's SIRS database, and go and click forward. For offsite management, it's tracked in a few different locations, but primarily we'll be able to go over that right now. Go ahead. So go and continue on our agenda for offsite management. We did split this into two areas that we kind of talked about earlier with manifested and unmanifested reports. The most used offsite hazardous waste tracking system is the Uniform Hazardous Waste Manifest. This manifest is a shipping document that accompanies hazardous waste from cradle to grave when it's transported offsite by the generator to a treatment, storage, recycling, or disposal facility. Manifested hazardous waste is taken from these manifests and recorded in US EPA's RCRA info database, and then California specific data goes to DTSC's hazardous waste tracking system. Manifested hazardous waste is taken from, approximately 500,000 manifests are generated in California each year. And if you're familiar with our Appendix B from our report, we did make some statistical adjustments for about 2,200 manifests, which likely had a large data recording error. To ensure better quality in the future, these errors should be corrected, as well as any outstanding errors that we may have missed. Next slide. For a more detailed review of manifested hazardous waste, this is a little commercial. We would recommend going and check out the report for people that haven't yet. We do talk about hazardous waste generation around California and where California generators are. We talk about federal RCRA waste versus California's non-RCRA waste. We also talk about where hazardous waste is being managed, either within California or abroad, and when management methods what management methods are being used for hazardous waste for either treatment, recycling, or disposal of that hazardous waste. And then with that, we can go to the next slide where we can carry on to Spencer, who's going to talk about some of the unmanifested hazardous waste.
Hi, as Shawn introduced me earlier, I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Spencer Eberhard. I'm an environmental scientist with the Hazardous Waste Management Plan Unit. And Shawn was just speaking about manifested waste, but I will be discussing the offsite recycling, treatment, and disposal of unmanifested waste. Emphasis on the unmanifested. To explain the difference between manifested and unmanifested, let's look at the picture on this slide. You might recognize it from earlier. That is a Uniform Hazardous Waste Manifest, which Shawn just described in those previous slides. This manifest, to reiterate, allows us to track hazardous waste cradle to grave, which is to say where it's generated, where it goes. It's crossed out here because as unmanifested waste streams, the manifest is not required. Now, why is that? Well, manifests are not required for some very specific waste streams because the lack of a manifest makes it easier for certain wastes to be managed appropriately. However, the lack of a manifest means there is no standardized tracking system like HWTS for these unmanifested waste streams. But that doesn't mean we have no information on unmanifested waste. I will be discussing the data and sources of data for two specific unmanifested waste streams, universal waste and household hazardous waste. I will be detailing the limitations of these data sources that we used and a summary of the treatment information we compiled in the 2023 report. There are, of course, other unmanifested waste streams like treated wood waste and used oil filters. But in the interest of time, I will only be detailing those two I just mentioned, the universal waste and household hazardous waste. So if you wish to know more about some of those other unmanifested waste streams, please consider checking out the report. Okay, and the chart here, we will be starting with universal waste. This chart summarizes the data sources we use to estimate the amount of offsite recycling, treatment, and disposal of universal waste, which again is an unmanifested waste. Because we don't have manifests for universal waste, we rely on specific reporting requirements and databases that are unique for these universal wastes. Universal waste, like electronic devices and photovoltaic modules, are really just solar panels. Those have annual reports that provide us data and are a way for us to get information on that waste stream. But some, if you see on the data source column on the right, it says information unavailable for lamps and non-empty aerosol cans. Those are also universal waste, but we don't really have a reliable source of information for those waste streams. So the two highlighted ones that I mentioned earlier, electronic devices and photovoltaic modules, or PVs for short, solar panels, are a reasonable representation of some of the report's findings through their annual reports. Part of why I chose these two is they demonstrate some of the key limitations that we have when doing capacity planning for unmanifested waste streams. And again, in the interest of time, I can't go through all of these universal waste types. So with that, let's go to the next slide. All right. Electronic devices are first. On the prior slide, you may have caught that the data source for electronic devices, it was something called UED. You might remember Shawn mentioned that earlier. It stands for the Universal Waste Electronic Device Online Notification and Reporting System. It's a bit of a mouthful, so it's often just referred to as UED, UWED. Now, Shawn mentioned that earlier, but well, what it really is that it's a database that holds the annual reports and notifications that handlers of electronic devices provide. The data in UED is very informative, but there are limitations that come into play when we try to quantify and analyze that data. The first limitation is that all this data was reported in either count or weight. This splits the data into the electronic devices that were reported in count, as in by individual devices, and those that reported the devices based on total weight, like in tons. Not only does this split the data between two metrics, but count can be less informative. Consider an electronic device can vary in size from what we see on the slide, phones, but then also it can include a television. That's a pretty significant difference in the size, and count doesn't really represent that like weight might. So reporting in count can provide less detail on the potential amount of hazardous waste compared to reporting in, say, weight. The second limitation is that when a device is reported as treated, this can mean several things. Essentially, handlers are authorized to treat electronic devices so long as they only alter the physical characteristics of the waste. This includes disassembly of the devices, removing of parts from them, or draining of the devices. Let me explain a little further what that treatment is. So next slide. All right, so this here is a visual representation of how an electronic device can be treated. Electronic devices are made up of different parts, and on the left, we have a visual representing an electronic device. The device can be disassembled by handlers into individual components. What started out on the left as an electronic device is treated by disassembly and becomes 4 different waste streams. In this case, a battery, a circuit board, aluminum frame, and a screen. Each of these new waste streams are then managed appropriately, which is good and what we want. But UED, the database, generally doesn't track these new waste streams. That's a bit of a data gap, and it's a limitation of UED. So when I refer to treatment of electronic devices, this is what I'm referring to, and that's what we are going to be looking at with the data. Speaking of data, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this chart is pulled directly from the report and is the amount of electronic devices treated by weight. Underline that for emphasis because, again, electronic devices can be reported in count or weight. This is all the treatment data reported in weight for 2021. The total is about 59,410 tons of electronic devices that were treated in California in 2021. If we are able to refine the data by county, with Fresno at the top with 15,170 tons, it then goes to San Bernardino at 11,270, and then Orange County, and so on. Most counties in California that treated electronic devices chose to report by weight. So that's the extent of the weight data for treatment. Let's go to the count on the next slide. This is the data of treated electronic devices as reported by count. 2 counties ended up reporting treatment by count in 2021. These are Alameda County and San Diego. Excuse me. The total count of electronic devices is 32,720 devices. This graph makes it pretty apparent that the vast majority, about 97%, was treated by handlers in Alameda County. Now, if you think back to earlier, I explained how electronic devices can be treated by disassembly. Consider that here we are seeing tens of thousands of electronic devices are treated each year. Each of these devices, if you recall, can create several waste streams, and they can vary so much in terms of size. My earlier example was the phone compared to a television. Weight gives us a better idea of the potential hazardous waste compared to count. So this is why we consider count and weight allowance a limitation. As the focus of our workshop is harmonizing data, if we could have only one metric like weight instead of count or weight, that is the way the data could become more uniform. Now let's look at photovoltaic modules and their data, because there are some similar limitations we want to point out. So next slide, please. All right, so we're going straight to the data here, but a little background. Photovoltaic modules, and I'm going to try to refer to them as just PV modules to be short, are solar panels. And they share similar requirements for their handlers as electronic devices we just discussed. Handlers of PV modules also file annual reports, and they also can be reported in count or weight. That's why we have these 2 charts here. On the left, we have count, and on the right, we have weight. Something to note is that currently DTSC is looking to change the requirement for PV annual reports to require only weight instead of count or weight, for much of the same reasons we just discussed for electronic devices. Having 2 metrics is less uniform, And PV modules can also vary in size, so weight is preferred. This change is something we intend to investigate to see if similarly can be applied to electronic devices. But we want to make sure we investigate it completely and recognize the reasons for why it has been and justify potential changes. That being said, let's actually discuss the charts. Starting with the left, a total of 1,340 individual PV modules were treated in 2021. This treatment is split, as you can see, between refurbished and recycled. Refurbished and recycled are a bit of vague terms, and we cannot verify we cannot verify that the recycling and refurbished terms are legitimate. Herein lies another limitation for some of these reporting requirements. There is a concept, to those of us in the department, where there is legitimate recycling and like sham recycling. Recycling is good, but we want to make sure the term is applied accurately, not just broadly. And we don't want to encompass something that is not sort of the complete recycling that people think of. So we are looking into how these terms are used in the reports. But what I've shown is what's explicitly contained in the reports. So that was the left chart, the count. On the right is the data by weight of treated PVs. A total of 650 tons were treated in 2021. 540 tons were reported to be managed under the reuse, recover, recycle hierarchy. Next, 80 tons were recycled, which means it occurred outside the reuse, recover, recycle hierarchy just mentioned. Lastly, about 30 tons were handled in California, but not shipped to a destination. The same considerations from the left chart apply to this one. The terms can be a bit vague, and we cannot verify the legitimacy of the purported recycling or reuse by looking at just the annual report information alone. For future reports and plans, we want to really narrow down to the best of our ability what is meant when handlers use these terms. But that's it for the universal waste. Let's shift gears and check out household hazardous waste. Next slide. Thank you. The name household hazardous waste can be is pretty straightforward. It's waste that households generate. The data for household hazardous waste comes from CalRecycle's Form 303s. These Form 303s are submitted by public agencies responsible for household hazardous waste management. Usually, these public agencies operate a household hazardous waste facility that collects household waste from people and ensures the different waste they collect are appropriately managed. The intent is to make it easier for households to ensure their waste is appropriately managed safely. And these facilities, they can receive a huge variety of waste that can range from batteries to paint, to give some examples. Overall, Form 303s provide three important things: the type of waste, the amount of the waste, and the disposition method. The image on the right is a snapshot of the database that allows us to look up these forms for all the facilities and compile the data. The forms in this database are great resources, but as is the case of unmanifested waste, we have to acknowledge there are some limits to how in-depth we can get. Let's take a look at the actual data. Okay, so this chart shows the disposition of California's household hazardous waste in 2020 to 2021, as reported on Form 303s. And this is in tons, weight. About 63,800 tons of household hazardous waste was treated, recycled, or disposed of in the 2020 to 2021 year. The largest disposition method was recycling. You can see at the bottom at about 36,630 tons. That is over half, about 57% was recycled. Second largest was management by Paint Care Stewardship Program with about 12,370 tons. The rest, as we go up, were subject to incineration, landfilling, reuse, and so on. One of the limitations of this database lies within these disposition methods. I want to point out the categories for disposition methods here are what the reporting agency, which fills out the Form 303, believes is most accurate. These disposition methods are clearly defined by CalRecycle. But like what I was talking about with PV modules earlier, based entirely on the forms alone, we cannot confirm the specific details of the categories, such as for recycling. This chart is made of the available data on the Form 303s for household hazardous waste. And one of our goals is to see if there are ways we can get more in-depth data from these, any supplements for capacity planning. But again, this data is unmanifested, and without uniform manifests and robust reporting requirements, there's only so much information available. Now, I hope this has served as an adequate representation of some of the data sources we have been analyzing. This is the unmanifested waste, and my goal has been to highlight the limitations of unmanifested data sources and just give a glimpse at some of the opportunities we've been looking at to enhance said data. With that, I've about finished my allotment for unmanifested waste, so I will be passing it back to Shawn. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Spencer. Appreciate that. Now I'll go, before we wrap up, we'll talk a little bit about some opportunities for expanding forecasting capabilities of hazardous waste. So now, yep, okay, go ahead. Next slide. So as we continue to understand the amount of hazardous waste that's being generated, we'll be able to expand our capabilities to be able to predict and forecast how hazardous waste is going to be generated in the following years. These projections would allow teams to understand hazardous waste streams and if they're historically increasing or decreasing year over year. If there are increases in hazardous waste in certain hazardous waste streams, we'll seek to understand the capacity for those waste streams, and if there is adequate capacity, at what level of increase would affect that capacity. One waste stream that continues to have capacity issues nationally is around hazardous waste that requires to be incinerated. Also, to know that we do expect new hazardous waste streams to be generated as technology and regulatory changes adjust hazardous waste generation. Next slide. To show example, here's a chart that compares California's top 3 manifested waste streams versus all other manifested hazardous waste. We have discussed this chart a few times in past workshops, and you can find more information there or in our hazardous waste management report. So from the bottom of the chart to the top, we see inorganic solids, used oil, which is waste oil or mixed oils, contaminated soil, and then finally all other manifested hazardous waste. If we isolate these top waste streams and look at a year over trend, we end up getting this chart. Next slide. Perfect. So here I've expanded this chart to a 21-year chart, and you can see that the net trends appear to be decreasing since the year 2000. Contaminated soil, which is that top line, appears to be a more volatile and has more aggressive increases and decreases, but still generation appears to be lower than in the early 2000s. For waste oil and inorganic solids, it appears to be decreasing with less volatility when you compare it to contaminated soil, and would likely be able to more accurately forecast what generation might be for this year or in 2025. Forecasting may not be a perfect science, as we do expect some fluctuations based on market changes, the economy, or technological advances. But this could be a significant tool to understanding hazardous waste management demand and understanding hazardous waste capacity needs in the future. Next slide. So to wrap up today's workshop and webinar, we discussed some opportunities that we see to improve data harmonization in our plan. We believe some goals or recommendations could be focused on a couple areas here. Understanding, investing, and utilizing source reduction data to better understand how much hazardous waste is not being generated due to source reduction activities. To get access and utilize data from California Environmental Reporting System and for on-site on-site management of hazardous waste. We think updating unmanifested data reporting systems and cleaning up manifested hazardous waste data would be important. And then utilizing hazardous waste forecasting to improve the understanding of hazardous waste management demand and capacity needs in the future. Next slide. With that, we can open it up for any public comments or feedback for today's discussion from everyone. So. Maybe Alejandro, are we seeing anything in the chats or anything from everyone?
We are not. So I'd like to remind everyone that they can submit some questions through the Q&A, or it looks like we have one that just came through the chat here. So let me. Okay, so first question being, can you speak to how unmanifested waste data is now being collected using EVQ?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that one. There are some changes to EVQ. I don't think we are prepared to speak on those currently. There was a webinar, was it last week or was it?
Yeah, I think it was about a week ago.
Yeah, I think it was very recently. And I think they went through in pretty deep detail what is going on in EVQ. But we're not ready to speak on that right now. So apologies. I'm not sure if that webinar has been posted or not, but I believe that is the plan from that group.
Yeah, that should be posted actually today, tomorrow morning at the earliest. I'm sorry, at the latest. But yeah, that you're correct. That webinar was held on the 31st. So you'll be able to have access to that and kind of tie things together.
Yeah.
Also,
Alejandro was facilitating that one.
Yeah, and you'll find that on that webinar too. There'll be email addresses to the EVQ office, and very direct questions can be asked regarding your specific facility or interest. Next, we have a question from Heidi Sanborn. I'm going to go ahead and unmute your microphone so you can go ahead and ask your question when you'd like. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry I was late to this meeting, but what I heard at the end was the household hazardous waste of what was collected, and there was a lot of information about what was collected, but all the hazardous waste facilities estimate that they're collecting at best 5 to 10% of what's out there. So I guess my question is, how are we going to get a handle of actually how much is becoming waste and is being legally disposed of trash in the recycling bins and illegally dumped? Because at one facility, the cow waste golf, they only accept blue bin recyclables, yet they pulled 173,000 pounds of household hazardous waste off that supposedly clean food grade material that's going to market. And I'm very concerned about the health effects of that.
I think that's a great question, Heidi. Thank you for asking that. We're right at the beginning of this evaluation, and so I think agree it's an issue that we need to dig into quite a bit. Out of curiosity, do you know or do you know of a not tracking system, but if the various entities that collection facilities, handlers, if they have like a load check tracking system that they employ and have data related to that? It's a question that we've been kind of circling around, and we haven't been able to put our finger on it yet. So do you know if those type of load check programs would assist in this type of evaluation? And is that where the estimation is coming from with the 5 to 10%?
Yeah, the operators that we talk to that run hazardous waste facilities do surveys when people come in and drop things off, and about how long they've been storing it. Did they bring it from other people? How, are they getting all of it, et cetera? And they get a lot of information through those surveys, which are accessible, and through the Household Hazardous Waste Information Exchange, which I believe Cal Recycle is very involved in. But I think DTSC needs to be very involved in to see those conversation amongst the operators of the hazardous waste facilities. But the main way we're figuring out what isn't getting handled properly, not from people doing it properly, it's from looking at what's ending up in trash via the landfill of the, when they're doing a load check, or when they're pulling out, they're sorting things at a MRF, material recovery facility, and they're literally having to pull the hazardous materials out and keep them separate and pay for them separately. Those two things, I do not believe anybody is totally quantifying how much that is. And I was shocked to find out that a clean MRF, just one in the state, is pulling that much off of a sort line that is supposedly full of clean recyclables that are going to go back and be made sometimes into food grade material.
Right.
And I think the haulers they have to sort it and have clean bales, but are they reporting that they have a hazardous waste facility on site and they aren't even supposed to need one? I don't know. And I think that's where you and Cal Recycle would be great to collaborate and figure out a way to determine. It might be best to just work with the MRFs to start, because they're the ones that are seeing it.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I think I know I have two small kids, and I have to remind them all the time not to throw those batteries away.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's great to work at, and I think we have some opportunities there too.
Oh yeah,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
I think so. Thank you for that.
If I could add on also something.
Yeah, go.
I also want to mention that, right, we really appreciate you sharing that question, because we're always looking for new avenues, and specifically the public often has a lot of things that we would love to follow up on and investigate. What I was reporting here in this presentation was just that's what's treated. We also have some other information you might find interesting in the report, so we encourage checking that out, because there's a lot of data there. But we definitely want to, for capacity plan's sake, figure out what's going on with all that waste that you're talking about is not necessarily accounted for. So we tend to follow up on this. We appreciate the comment.
Great, thank you. We also have another question from Earl Thomas. How does the HHW data tracking system capture hazardous waste generated by very small quantity generators?
Would you like me? Would you like me? Sure. Okay. Yeah, so the household hazardous waste data tracking that we were looking into, a lot of that tends to be the waste consolidated from the facilities. So like was just sort of mentioned, there are some surveys that keep track of some of that information of where it comes from. What we use for this data right here is the stuff that we obtained from the Form 303s that are submitted by the facilities. So we could try to investigate further as one of our goals, to figure out some of those sources and as much detail as we can. But yeah, it could tend to fall within that it's a lot of it's consolidated and some of it's a little harder to track, but we want to investigate further.
Yeah, and I can also add that a lot of household hazardous waste facilities, when they do have the aggregated hazardous waste, will also manifest their hazardous waste off, and then we could see some overlap in that tracking databases there.
Great, thank you. There is another question in the chat, and then there's someone with a hand raised, so I'll go ahead and get to the chat first, and then the person with their hand raised. First question. I represent 7 facilities here in California, but we also have stores out of state. Do you see this spreading to other states? That's from Al Preen or Prine. I apologize if I didn't pronounce that correctly.
Oh. Al, I'm wondering if you can clarify that question, if we see what spreading. Maybe I missed part of was an earlier question.
Yeah, it was in the chat. He's asking about 7 facilities here in California, but they also have other stores out of state.
Oh.
I think at the highest level, we're right now we're looking at the California specific side of things. Anything that is federal mandates would not necessarily encompass a lot of the changes that we're talking about, but we're open to partner with a lot of different agencies to be able to try to help improve as well. So there's always invitations for conversations. We're gonna add to that.
Okay.
Great, thank you. And then we have another question. I'm going to go ahead and unmute this person in the well, one of our participants, Elizabeth Rowan. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Hi, can you hear me?
So, yes, but it's very,
okay.
There we go. That's a little better.
Okay. So I just wanted to make a couple comments. One about the MRFs that Heidi was mentioning. They are required to ship all of their hazardous waste load check on manifest. So you guys should have that data if you've looked at their manifests. And then also just want to confirm that the VSQG that comes in through HHW programs, we are allowed to consolidate that with the waste that comes in through the residential program. It's cheaper for us to do it that way. So think twice about asking for that to be separated out. It's going to cost us more money and we're not going to want to do it. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate feedback. We want to hear from the people that are connected to the things that we're researching, and that's a very useful perspective. Appreciate you contributing.
And it looks like we don't have any other questions from what I can tell here, either in the chat or from raised hands from attendees.
Okay, awesome.
Let's go ahead and talk about kind of the next pieces, and then we can come back, and we still have time, so we can continue on if there are questions, if anybody wants to stay and talk.
If we get any pressing questions, we'll be here.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, next slide. So yeah, we covered a fair amount of information today, and we do appreciate everyone's feedback. Here we're providing, again, that tentative workshop schedule. There are a range of different dates, a range of different subjects that we are going to be discussing at each of them. So choose your own adventure, I guess you could say. And if you are interested in these, please join our e-list. We do send out invitations when everything does get locked down, and we're able to invite and see you guys there. Go ahead, next slide. Quick reminder of ways to get a hold of us. We do have our website. We do update that frequently to be able to provide the information that we are discussing. There's also the Hazardous Waste Management report housed there, very detailed discussion. Join our e-list. And again, here's our email address. If you have any comments or questions, you want to just reach out to us as well. So that's a location for us as well to interact with you. And then I think we can reopen it up if there are those final questions on the next slide.
Yeah. So if anybody has any other questions or additions, please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. This is one of those topics that we were very excited to talk about.
Ese fue
one
uno
of
de
the
los
first ones that
temas.
we had to start with was, where does all the data live? And then how do we gather it, organize it, and evaluate it, and what's there? And I think it really speaks to the ongoing nature of and iterative nature of the reporting and planning process. And so these aren't easy problems to address, or problems or issues or topics. And so it takes time and close study. So we are trying to provide deeper dives in here so we can try and shake the trees to get some of these questions and concerns from you all. So it's very much appreciated, the feedback.
We do have one
one
question that came through here in the Q&A. Excuse me, it's from Cynthia Babbage, and they are asking, when will this recording and slides be uploaded to the website?
Sure. The recording.
The slides are available now.
Oh, the slides are up now, and the recording has been taking 2 to 3 weeks, is what it's been taking.
And this can also be found on our website, right?
Yeah, and it will be on our website. And hi, Cynthia. Just as a reminder, the date for the next workshop in this presentation is showing as August 14th, but ran into some logistical issues this morning, and we're going to move that back a week to the 21st. And that is reflected on the website. Not yet, but it will be reflected on the website shortly. So thank you for bearing with us on that one. Okay.
Yeah, it looks like that's all we've got as far as questions. I don't think we have any outstanding. So please, everyone, thank you for attending, and take a look at our chat and you'll find a workshop survey.
I'll link to the PowerPoint. Oh, it's being Felice is adding it now. Oh, and yes, Cynthia will try to expedite getting the recording of it up. That's yeah, it's been taking 2 to 3 weeks through the process that it needs to go through. So that's we will try and get it up there faster.
We're glad that you're very interested in our discussion today. So we appreciate that.
So the link to the presentation is in the chat now. And yeah, any other questions or comments? Okay.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we can wrap it up with that. Thanks everybody for attending again. And as always, feel free to reach out to us, send us questions. If we know the answer, we can respond back with the answer. If not, we'll have to go and research it. And that's how we've been kind of managing those types of questions. And then we'll try and incorporate the information in events like this.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Okay, everyone.
Okay,
well, thanks very much for attending this morning. VTSC really appreciates you taking the time out of your day to join us. And thanks again to all our panelists. A wonderful job. And we appreciate you as well.
All right. Thanks, everybody.